Hello, guys, and welcome back to the Two Tone Crew. You are listening live to episode 137. I don't know why I called it a separate episode, but might as well just stick with it now because we are recapping rounds 2 and 3 of the NFL draft. It is wrapping up or just wrapped up round 3 of the NFL draft. And the Titans have made 2 more selections, actually had a little movement. Didn't trade back up in the second round, but they did trade up in the third. And here with me tonight to talk about that is Jamal. Welcome back.
John, I feel like I just talked to you, and I don't mind. I don't mind you, and I certainly don't mind the Titans draft so far, and just the fact that there's football news this time of year.
That's right. Yep. So not going to be as long of an episode tonight. We'll probably keep this one pretty brief because admittedly, as you start to get to these later round guys, we just haven't had as much time to dive into them yet. There were a couple of guys that I had looked into and identified early on. Taywan Taylor, the first pick that the Titans made, they traded up for him in the third round, number 72 overall. And then they also took the tight end, Jonnu Smith, who is not a player that I had looked into much at all. He was a confirmed visit of the Titans' 30 players that they're allowed to have visit. And I believe that they said Taywan Taylor was as well in the press conference. We did not have him as a confirmed visit on our list. So that's one of those unknowns that we didn't know about. But yeah, we just admittedly have not had a lot of time to dive in and look at these guys yet. So we're going to talk more big picture and just kind of what we're hearing. I got to say, I mean, lots of what I'm reading and hearing online about Taywan Taylor is pretty positive. He's clearly the slot guy. The Kendall Wright replacement is what they're hoping for here. You look at his NFL.com profile, the player comparison there is Stefon Diggs. They talk about him being a slot-only receiver, athleticism and separation, quickness. And again, we come back to production here because this guy had insane production. That is something we can see right away. So John Robinson said he valued that when he first took over with the Titans, and we saw that with the Corey Davis pick, and we're seeing it here again with the Taywan Taylor pick. So they go wide receiver again, Jamal. What do you think about that?
Well, we talked about it yesterday, and I received a little bit of heat for it after that podcast, but I'm not too surprised. I think the wide receiver group, despite the fact that Mike Mularkey harped on it constantly, it was probably underrated by fans just how bad they were. And yes, that is my Marcus Mariota's awesome bias creeping in here, but I think Marcus hid some warts there. And the heavy run game also hid some warts, I will admit that. I'm not surprised that they went wide receiver again, especially when you start looking at it. I mean, you said that they both had a lot of production. I think it's like they drafted the number 1 and 15th highest yards ever or something. I'd have to look at the stat again, but I mean, like, both guys are heavy on production, and they're complementary. So Taywan Taylor plays in the slot, can also play outside. Corey Davis outside could play in the slot. So it's a really good combination. And then you add in, I'm going to skip ahead real quick here, but you add in the tight end, Jonnu Smith, I think is how you would pronounce his first name, Jonnu. He's more of a receiving tight end. Now, they said that they're going to see if he can play the point, but he's a receiving tight end, which is, this always cracks me up. They're like, electric when the ball is in his hands, but he doesn't catch well. It's like, well, okay. But again, another playmaker, right? So I think that they have the beginnings of, and granted, everyone has to progress and grow as players and everything, but they're all going to be rookies this year, right? And there will be some lack of production because of that, but give them just a little bit of time, and they have some major weapons that they've given Marcus Mariota. And I am super excited about the direction they're taking this. Free agency covered the defense really well, almost exclusively. I remember commenting about that with you at the time. And now in the draft, yes, they got Adoree Jackson with their second pick in the first round, but otherwise 3 playmakers on offense. And Adoree Jackson is a playmaker too. I mean, one of the things last year that was a weakness for this team was it was like grind everything out, no turnovers even on defense. Like, there were no big plays, and now you've got it.
Indeed. Yeah. And I think the stat you were looking for, Terry Lambert tweeted out of Music City Miracles a little bit earlier tonight. The Titans have selected 2 wide receivers. They rank first and 15th all time in NCAA career receiving yards. So, yeah, production. If you think it doesn't matter for John Robinson, look no further than those 2 guys right there. And one thing we haven't even mentioned about Taywan Taylor, or I think I mentioned it briefly, is the fact that they traded up for him. So this is clearly a guy that they coveted. They gave up a 4th-round pick to New England to do it. They picked up a 6th-round pick. So we're not going to have any 4th-round pick tomorrow. We did still keep our 3rd-round pick, number 100, to take Smith. But yeah, so this was clearly a guy that the Titans identified and must have had a feeling that he was not going to be there. So they made the move, went up, traded for him. And man, that wide receiver room next year is going to be exciting because
it's going to be young.
Yeah, it's young. It's going to be, you've got Rashard Matthews, who's probably going to be the vet in the room. I think Harry Douglas is going to be struggling to make the team at this point. We know he had the reworked contract. Maybe they keep him around as a guy that just is inactive on game day because he's definitely not going to be playing on special teams or anything like that. But you got to think Davis, Matthews, and Sharp are locks right there. That's 3. And then Taywan Taylor, probably going to be a lock as well. That gives you 4. Do they keep 5 wide receivers? You also have Trey McBride in the mix as well. So it's McBride's going to be fighting for a roster spot, maybe with Harry Douglas. Maybe that's what it ends up coming down to if they decide to keep 5. We've known the Titans to roll with 4 before. I wouldn't go with 4. I bet they'll keep 5, but could be one of those 2 that ends up getting the axe between McBride and Douglas.
Well, and didn't they, in free agency, didn't they pick up a wide receiver who played for Atlanta, was more of a special teams guy?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't know that they'll play him much at receiver. He's primarily a special teams guy, but you're right. Yeah, his position is going to be listed as wide receiver. So
he's one whose position has become less stable with this draft. By the way, does Taywan Taylor, do you know, does he have kick return ability there?
They did say, I saw him, I believe he actually said that he has some experience and can return punts and kicks if needed.
Okay. Because that would be interesting to have Adoree Jackson doing punts and Taywan Taylor doing the kickoffs. But if I remember right, and this is going back to free agency, and I can't hardly remember yesterday at this point, but the wide receiver we picked up had one of his things that he could contribute on was actually being the returner. That may or may not be true.
Yeah, Eric Weems. Yeah, that's the guy that now he's also, from what I remember reading, I think he's a really good gunner. So on punt team as well. But he did return kicks. And just looking, I pulled up the stat here on Taywan Taylor. He only returned kicks, and looks like that would have been his sophomore year. And so he had 6 kick returns. Looks like he's never returned punts in college. But maybe I definitely saw him confirm that he could do it. So maybe it was more of a question of, hey, would you be willing to do it? And of course they're going to say, yeah, at this point.
Yeah. It's just, this has been an interesting draft because it's the porn star draft. J-Rob is just filling holes out there left and right. It's one of those drafts where you always feel like they're going to take a best player available. So you might not get those positions you really need, but they're just checking off boxes right now.
Yeah. Straight need down the board, it seems. The tight end, let's talk about him a little bit, Jonnu Smith. If you go to NFL.com, you know how they always do little player comparisons. The comparison they list is actually Delanie Walker. And I haven't had too much time to investigate him, but from what I've read, it sounds like he has some inline blocking experience, but he's primarily a pass catcher. Very athletic for a tight end from what I read. And I'm kind of surprised by that. I thought they might go more of just a straight up blocking tight end in the vein of like a George Kittle who could take over for Fasano. And that's ultimately not what they did. Now, this guy could definitely learn, but I think I even have a post that said, looks like this is the replacement for Fasano, but I'm not sure. Maybe they're looking at this guy to sort of compete with Amaro, who we do still have on the roster. And Amaro is definitely more of a pass-catching tight end. And then maybe Malarkey is completely comfortable leaving Supernaw, leaving him to taking over the blocking duties.
Well, and the other thing is, you improve the wide receiver group. You have some natural more faith in the offensive line, especially your right tackle. Conklin did get a good bit of help last year. And they've got now a year where they're all playing together. We may not play two tight end as much as we did last year. We have more weapons at wide receiver. Marcus is yet another year progressed into his NFL career and getting more comfortable. You might see some shift towards playing more 3 wide receiver sets.
Yeah, I wondered about that. I think there were a couple of posts over on titansreport.com about that as well. And very bizarre. I don't think we can do the podcast without mentioning this bizarre story with Jonnu Smith. They talked about it on ESPN right when they drafted him. Apparently, his girlfriend, they got into an argument and she poured boiling water on him, and it actually caused him to miss a game or two. I think it was one game that Trey Wingo was saying that he was expected to miss 3 or 4 and only ended up missing 1. Just a bizarre, strange story right there. So, I mean, I don't know that you'd say it's a red flag, but it's kind of a, okay, that's an interesting one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's one where they try and find him another friend to spend time with. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't care how bad the argument is. What kind of crazy person throws boiling water? Like,
crossing the line just a tad?
Are we in India? Are you throwing acid on people? Like, this is not okay behavior. I don't care what's going on. You can't throw boiling water on somebody when you're arguing. They better have killed a family member for that to be what you're doing. It just makes no sense. That level of crazy has no business in his life at this point. He needs to dedicate to football and kick the crazy out of town.
This may sound terrible to say, but do you not commend the guy for not retaliating? I mean, it wouldn't shock me if something like that happened, and then the next part of the story was then he beat her up. I mean, that's
Well, that or he was on the floor crying. I mean, boiling water. I can't imagine how that feels.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law accidentally, not in anger, but accidentally dumped boiling water on his 2-year-old at one point. So I do have some experience with the types of injuries that can come from that.
Oh man, that's terrible.
Yeah, that just, when I read that about him, it was like, what? Really? You just wonder, where is that woman now?
It's one of those lines when you're reading these NFL.com profiles, they have them for every player. And it's just like, wait, what? But missed the end of the year when his pregnant girlfriend doused him with a pot of boiling water during an argument. Strengths, plays with urgency, and looks to squeeze the most out of it. Wait, no, you can't just keep going after that. Yeah, so I think right away he's probably going to be a guy that they're going to be plugging in behind Delaney to learn from him.
Mm-hmm.
The more I read, and again, we're going to have to do more research on these guys, I don't think he's the Fasano replacement now. I think Supernaw, as indicated by this pick, by the fact that this guy wasn't a strict inline blocking tight end, I think that Supernaw is probably going to have that position next year. And Mularkey had already expressed confidence in him for doing that. One more thing I want to talk about before we kind of wrap up here is, what do you make of this, the small school draft that we seem to have going on here?
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a lot of talk about Corey Davis, especially about the fact that he did not play against, a lot of top competition, and how would that affect his draft stock was really that was the biggest question about him throughout this whole process, maybe the ankle as well. And now here we are through the Titans' first 4 picks, and 3 of them come from very small schools. You got Corey Davis, Western Michigan, Taywan Taylor out of Western Kentucky, and then Jonnu Smith here from Florida International. And all small conferences, of course, Adoree Jackson, USC. But that's interesting to me. I mean, that really sort of drives home what we learned about Jon Robinson last year and how he values production. He's definitely you can tell that he's a scout in the fact that he values those guys who, I mean, I think all 3, let's see. I know Davis was a 4-year player. Taywan Taylor was a 4-year player, and I'm pretty sure Jonnu Smith was a 4-year player as well. I think Adoree was a 3-year player at USC. So he values these guys that have that experience and production. Doesn't seem that level of competition is all that important to him.
Well, actually, so competition matters to him, but what he cares about more. And if you, I don't know if you had a chance to watch their really quick press conference
I haven't
tonight.
watched this one yet. No.
But he kind of talked about a little bit of just saying, because not only did these guys play at small schools, all three of them only had one offer coming out of high school, and he was asked about that, and he said, what I like to see from players is somebody who will be told no and will then go and do it anyway.
Hmm.
Somebody who will be told you can't do it and they go prove you wrong. That level of competition, that level of I won't give up, if it turns into the guy actually is athletically capable and polished as a player, if he learned to do that. I mean, think about Conklin last year. If you
Right.
become a good player, not just because you've always kind of been at the top of your class, but because you worked your butt off to become that player, and then you're good, you have a work ethic that others don't. You have a dedication that others don't. And I think he's, at least in this draft, identified players who fit that mold.
Yep. So, I mean, now with the way that things shook out, like I said, we will not have a fourth round pick. We'll have a fifth round pick. We'll have two in the sixth round and then one in the seventh round. So, do you think we finally start to see those value picks now in terms of just taking BPA, or are they going to stick to needs and maybe add a linebacker here, potentially another corner? Let's see what else. Running back, maybe safety. I don't know.
Well, I think one of the other things that John Robinson said in the press conference tonight, and I mean, he's so. If you ask him, are you going to? Because I think Paul Kawarski started with, are you going to look to defense tomorrow? And he's like, that's an option. It's like, well, that tells me nothing. It's like yesterday
Right.
when people were saying, hey, can he play outside and inside? You can't ask John Robinson a question that contains the answer. Like in general,
Yep.
that's a bad interview
Exactly.
question. But him especially, he'll just say, yeah, yeah, all of the above. He'll always say that. So, but he was asked about it, and he said, it kind of depends on how our board goes. I have a feeling right now. I want to say that he said maybe some defensive backs still, and then defensive line that they think they might still have some guys on their board who are available when they come back up. So, we'll see. Defensive line would be interesting because that's a position group where I don't feel a strong need as a fan. But maybe they identify a player who fills a specific role or who they think has a lot more value than the draft slot.
Yeah. All right. Anything else to add on these two picks, or anything to happen that happened today to kind of change your thoughts or enhance your thoughts on Corey Davis or Adoree Jackson?
I think the thing that I started thinking about last night was um, they got, so obviously the most productive wide receiver, right? And then they got the top award-winning cornerback who is also a gadget guy and everything else. And so he's maybe more widely useful. And so he never really focused on cornerback. So he has some polish left
Yeah.
that he needs to learn. But um, they got like two guys who, if you just like write a real quick blurb about them, you could make an argument they are the best at their position. And then you get a guy like Taywan Taylor, who among the players who you would be looking for as a slot receiver, he's right among the best. And you just start looking at it, and it's like, how did they get like the best guy every time? You can always convince yourself as a fan that everybody's the best guy. But yeah, I actually was much higher on Adoree Jackson after thinking about it. I like having a guy who's polished out the outset, but they went for some upside with him there, and
Yeah.
but also filling needs. I mean, returner was a big issue, and he has that ability. And then just being a gadget guy when your coach is Inspector Gadget, it's just a good fit. So
Yeah. The other
that's
thing
what I started thinking about more.
The other thing about Adoree, you touched on it a little bit, but yeah, they were trying him and using him in all sorts of different ways. He was also on the track team. I even read that, I mean, he could legitimately compete in the Olympics in one of the jumping competitions.
Yeah,
So,
he was trying to, I think, actually make the Olympic team this last Olympics, and he didn't, but he was trying to actually, I think.
yeah, so he had his time split between a lot of different things there. And I think Samari Roll even said that he has basically the traits that you can't coach them. The things that he lacks are things that you can coach him up on, things like technique and doing it the same way every time, and just totally changing your, not totally changing, but just sort of fine tuning your mechanics. Whereas the type of athleticism, the speed, the ability that he has, I mean, that kind of stuff, you can't coach that, and that he has. So yeah, the more I thought about it, the more I liked that pick as well. He was a guy that for some reason there was just not, we didn't talk about him a ton leading up to the draft. And I don't know if something leaked the day before or what, but I know both Daniel Jeremiah and Mike Mayock mocked him to us at number 18. I think there was one more, maybe a guy. It was either Charlie Campbell or Walter Football. I believe somebody else mocked him to us as well. So something apparently happened a couple days before the draft that tipped people off that we were really interested in. But I mean, like I said the other night, at worst, he's going to be a dynamic punt returner. And we know how crucial that was last season. I mean, we've talked at length about how special teams cost us easily one game last season. You could make the argument for even 2 or 3 games that it cost us. And one game was the difference in the division last year.
Well, and even the games where you can't directly say it cost us the game, like the offense was not in as good a position as they should have been. Like they were consistently having more weight put on their back trying to then go. And then when the offense was more of a run heavy offense, it places a lot of stress on that. One thing before I forget, I wanted to say it's interesting to think about in their top 3 picks, the Titans traded up for 1 and they like ran to the podium with the other one. And then at pick 5, they got the wide receiver they want. So among their picks, teams take guys and then they always say, yeah, that's the guy we wanted. But like, I think about why did they turn in the pick so early at 18? Like what was to gain? Maybe there was no reason to delay. But like, it's just weird that they like turned it in almost immediately.
Yeah, it's also one of those things you're shocked that no one has asked them in the media, because it was such a striking difference between pick 5 and pick 18. And even in the press conference, Robinson talked about that they did get offers on 18, or at least had conversations.
So action or
yeah. When did those? Was that? I don't know. Maybe a guy went off the board at 16 that immediately ended any thought of a trade. I'm not sure, but yeah, it was very strange.
I think at 5 they wanted to trade back, but clearly at 18 they saw Adoree as great value, and then they traded up for Taywan Taylor. So that gives me a lot more confidence than just in general that these are guys that they really had targeted. In terms of the picks, by the way, I think you saw this because we were talking about it, but Ben Fennell, who's been on the podcast before, he works for the NFL Network, does some college football, and is actually a video editor, I think, for the Eagles now. He tweets a lot of all 22 breakdown throughout the season. He's a good follow on Twitter. But he tweeted out tonight, developing a soft spot for the Titans, love the run game in 16, Mariota developing, offensive line young, and now they've added my 2 favorite wide receivers in the draft. And there were other, what's his name? Josh Norris. Josh Norris had Taywan Taylor, I think, ranked like high 30s for people on his board. So there's a lot of love for the draft that the Titans are having, I think.
Yes, definitely seems to be that way. And just to be fully clear and fully encompassing of all the opinions, it's not totally positive. You know, I've seen a few folks on Titans Report and a few folks online kind of break down and question the Taywan Taylor pick a little bit. I mean, you could have questions on all of them, but
well, and I think Tom Gower wasn't a big fan of the draft so far in many ways.
Yeah, Tom, we've had him on. I don't think he was a big fan of the trade, just in terms of the value that they were giving up there.
And he said something about Adoree. I think because he's not polished, but he called him something along the lines of not a good football player, more of just like a playmaker,
athlete. Yeah,
yeah. So there's always room to critique, but yeah. Yesterday we talked about if you had told me the Titans were both not going to trade down and pass on Howard twice, I would have said you were crazy.
He said no way. Yeah.
Now they've not only not traded down, but they've traded up.
Yeah.
No one would have predicted that. Like, you could have made so much money in Vegas if that was something to bet on.
Indeed. Well, we will see if we can do another one of these tonight. I'm not sure if we might have a little scheduling conflict. We'll see if we can get anyone on tomorrow to do one of these. To be honest, we probably won't know a lot about the guys that they take in those rounds anyway. But it would be good to come back and do kind of a final draft show recapping everything. John Robinson, in fact, they asked him if they would sort of dip back into free agency probably about a week ago. He was asked this, and he said hopefully not, that he wanted to address everything in the draft and basically have the team set. So I can't imagine they won't add anyone else on kind of the waiver wire later on, but we'll see. Cornerback's one that a lot of people are talking about, and as I look at the corners, I would be surprised if they draft another one the more I think about it, because you've got so many young guys there. I mean, Logan Ryan is the vet in the room. You've got McCain, who may or may not even make the roster. So those are your two veteran guys there. And then aside from that, you've got Adoree Jackson, you've got LaShawn Sims, you've got Kalen Reed. How do you feel about Kalen Reed? Do you want to try and bring competition for him, him or McCain? Do you want to go the vet route, or do you want to go the draft route? So that's one that I think a lot of people were expecting us to go ahead and take another corner at some point, and I'm not so sure.
Well, I think if they did go cornerback, they definitely would. You would think they'd go somebody who is physically very different from Adoree Jackson. They go for the bigger guy, the longer strider. It would be interesting, but yeah, I mean, I always feel that way when you start getting later in the draft. It's like, are you really going to find a true replacement later in the draft?
Exactly.
But guys fall who teams have specifically identified, and you can find a lot of value. I mean, McCourty, when did we take him? 6th round? You can find guys there that you don't even expect to be as good as the other guy you drafted, and they end up being the one that breaks out and is a playmaker for you. So,
yeah, 6th round on McCourty, by the way. All right, well, thank you guys so much for listening. We appreciate you tuning in. Of course, we are the official. Talking too fast tonight. I'm tired. We've had 2 late nights in a row here. You can find us online at titansreport.com. We are on Twitter at Titans Report. There's a Facebook group, facebook.com/TitansReport. A voicemail line as well. We're going to get to some of those probably next week or maybe the week after, 615-900-0282. You can call and leave your thoughts about the draft. Once again, that's 615-900-0282. This has been episode 137, recapping rounds 2 and 3 of the NFL draft. Jamal, thanks so much for coming back tonight.
John, thanks for
you didn't
always
expect me to throw it back to you, did you?
No, but I will say it's hard to find reliable people who will do podcasts, and not only that, but to do it well. And I think everyone who listens to this podcast is well aware that Scotty and I aren't the talent and don't drive this thing. You do. And as a Titans fan who used to wish there were podcasts and such, even though I'm on this podcast, I'm still going to thank you for being the engine that keeps this thing running, because it's fun to talk about the Titans, and I think it adds to the experience for everybody. So on behalf of our listeners who have never told me this themselves, I'll tell you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's been fun. It's been a fun draft, and we still got a couple more rounds to go. And then we have that nice big long lull where nothing at all happens for about 3 months. So
just long enough for everybody to start panicking that Marcus won't be ready for camp or something.
Yeah, that's the next storyline, right? All right, guys, have a good night, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Thanks.